Why don't we start? I'm hoping that everybody who joined us saw the film. It's a beautiful film, very touching. And of course, one could say, well, Holocaust stories and family stories always touching, but really this one was unique to me the first time I saw it. For those of you who haven't had the chance to see it and you're joining in, so welcome to Docu TV, and thank you for Lami Katz to inviting us and allowing me to do this. The film is, I'll just say a few words about it, back in Berlin, made by Bobby, and he's also the main protagonist there. Shortly after his father's death, he returns to his native England and discovers an old suitcase that reveals the truth about his father and what happened during World War II and the Holocaust, where he lost his family. And he turns to Manuel, who's his best friend and happens to be German-born. And Manuel translates the documents in this amazing suitcase found and shares also that he also discovers something about his own family, that his great uncle was the infamous Nazi filmmaker Veit Harlan, the director of Zeus. I hope I'm saying that right. And this is really their journey. It's also into the past of both their families, but also in the present. It's about their friendship, really. So thank you for both of you for joining us. I want to ask Bobby, how long did you have this idea of wanting to make a film about your father? How many years did you carry this idea with you?
Right. Well, if I may, before I answer that, I would like just to mention that David Zarif is also with us on this session. And his presence here is of significance to me in answering your question as well. David is the DP, Director of Photography, on this film and on, I think, anything of value that I've directed in the last 2 decades. So I'm very glad that he's here this evening, and it's another opportunity for me to say how glad I am that he was a part of this project in particular. His role here was of enormous significance. So for many, many years, because although this is my first full-length documentary film, because I've always worked in television. That has been my profession since before I moved to live in Israel. So I've been doing it for 30 odd years, but not in documentary. My sort of main field is always, well, I mean, I guess sort of living in Israel, you tend to find yourself being a bit of a jack of all trades. So I've done a bit of everything, but certainly the sort of main part of my work has always been making children's television, quality children's programming, which is something that I find very rewarding and very creatively satisfying, and which I've earned a living from, unlike making documentaries, which I think most of us will probably agree is not something that you can really make a living from, and unless you're amongst a very unique few. It's not easy. It's not easy. So for many, many years, because I obviously was in the field of television and film, I always thought, at some point I have to touch on my father's story. But I didn't really have a handle. I knew nothing about it. I didn't know where to start. And I guess I just kind of figured, well, when the time comes, I'll know. And so I let it be. What actually happened was that I was scheduled for a very major project, which was cancelled at the last minute. And I suddenly found myself with time on my hands. And it was actually Holocaust Day in Israel. And I'd sat watching some extraordinarily good, what we call second generation movies, Holocaust movies, of which there are some superb ones around. And I then sort of hopped in the shower, having watched one, and thought to myself, well, I actually ought to utilize this hiatus that I have now of a couple of months free, and get round to making this film, which I've been wanting to make for so long. And I really had nothing sort of concrete that I knew I was going to do, but fortunately, David Zarif, my partner in crime, I rang him up the following day, or even that same evening, I think, when I got out the shower, and got him on board. And I said to him, you know, I want to make a start with this. I don't know where it's going. And within 2 weeks, we were on a plane to England. And I had sort of vague ideas of what I wanted to do, but it all really kicked off on the very first day of filming in England, where we'd arranged to meet my brother by our father's grave in the cemetery in Bushey in London. The idea being that I wanted to talk about our childhood and the difficulties that I felt I'd experienced with our dad and how that connected to his biography. And in that same conversation, and obviously that's one of the opening scenes of the film, which is a genuine and remarkable moment. My brother tells me about the suitcase. I had no idea about this suitcase. I guess prerogative of an older brother, knows things that the younger brother doesn't. He'd never seen it, but he was aware that it existed. He very tearfully recounted how, when we were kids, he would find it difficult to fall asleep knowing that this suitcase was in the attic above our bedroom. Wow. But he'd never seen it, and he didn't know what was in it. That was the point at which I said, okay, we actually have now something to start with. I'm immediately started making changes to everything we planned for that week. The following day, we turned up at my mum's flat first thing in the morning, spent literally the entire day turning the flat upside down, because my mum also knew the suitcase existed, but she'd never seen it. And I knew my mother never threw anything away. Even though my father had passed away several years before that, I knew that it was just a matter of time and we would find the suitcase.
Do you understand that it's like a documentarist dream to find the suitcase that is 50, 60 years old and nobody's touched it and nobody's seen it? It's, I mean, people fake this to make it, and it just landed in your lap.
I was extremely fortunate in many, many respects, with remarkable things happening on camera. There are several moments in the course of the film where I still now, when I watch it, I have to pinch myself, because it is almost inconceivable that such a remarkable series of events should have happened on camera. So yeah, absolutely a filmmaker's dream. And that was really where things kicked off.
I just want to say that I have a few more questions, and to you and to Manuel and David Zarif, and then whatever questions everybody has, please put them in the chat and I'll ask them just right after that. Please do. And also at this point, I'd like to say that if you can contribute to DocuTV, this would be a good time to do this. As we said, documentaries, you know, they're not easy to make, and the budgets, at least in Israel, are not very big. So this is an opportunity to support the artists who make, the filmmakers who make these films. So I wanted also to ask you, so, okay, so David is there with you. Do you serve as sort of a creative team, thinking together what will be the next scenes? David is a very prominent DP here in Israel. I mean, I've worked with you on many, many documentaries, so he has a lot of experience, and maybe you needed another eye, or did you think of it yourself? How did that work?
I think one of the advantages for me of having David on my side was because we've worked together for so many years, we have a sort of almost a telepathy. And I think it was, for me, it was very, anybody who has worked with me, and I can see that there is at least one person in our audience this evening who can vouch for this. I'm a bit of a control freak. And I don't think I would have been able to put myself in anybody else's hands. But obviously with David, not only do I have implicit trust in his professionalism, but also in his in him as a friend. And that was of enormous significance. And I, you know, over the sort of 5.5 years that I was working on this film, I can see the learning curve that I have gone through in the course of production as well, where initially I'm still sort of, I found it very difficult to be on camera, to be the protagonist, and to be directing it. And that for me was a first. And I don't know how Woody Allen does it. I think it's extraordinarily difficult to be in your own film unless you are surrounded by people that you have implicit trust in. So I was very fortunate in that respect. In the early scenes, I look at them now and I can see, I mean, that suitcase scene is a very good example where I underreact. And a lot of people have said to me, surely that's not the genuine moment that it happened. And it is. And I think my sort of underreaction there is primarily because when I watch it now, I can see myself thinking production. Okay, what does this mean? I have to cancel what we're doing tomorrow. We're going to go to my mum's. And it's like I'm there in the scene and I'm thinking about all these things. In the course of the years of working on the film, I'm very aware when I watch the scenes now of how we do reach a point where I'm able to, where I can see that I've disconnected from making the film and I've allowed myself to be within the scene, to allow it to take place around me.
It's very clear throughout the film that it's like your character develops an ability to actually emotionally react to whatever's happening. It's like you're slowly connecting to what is happening. So now I understand, you know, why that is. I'd like to bring into the discussion, Manuel, if possible. When did you two, or when did you, Bobby, as the person who instigated this whole thing, realize that this was going to be a journey of the two of you and not just of you by yourself?
I think for me, it was a realization that although, as I said, my sort of inspiration came from extremely good second generation films, I think for me, there was a realization when Manuel told me about this great uncle of his that he obviously didn't know, but that he'd heard things about. I think that was the point at which I said, okay, so this actually potentially will make a more interesting film with a different sort of narrative, rather than, you know, I often said I could have just made a film about my dad's suitcase. In many respects, I kind of feel like I neglected that, and there was, you know, an enormous amount of material there that I could have focused on far more. But the film took a different course, which I think I sort of constantly found myself reassessing what the film was actually going to be about. And so obviously once Manuel had told me about this great uncle, that was the point at which I said, okay, so this actually could be more interesting, that we set off on this voyage together. I don't think either of us envisaged where that voyage was going to take us and what ultimately would be a very central aspect of the film, which is the conflict that he and I go through, which was certainly not premeditated or planned in any way. This also is an opportunity for me to say that I was extraordinarily fortunate that I had a friend like Manuel, who, apart from being a mensch, was also an extremely good friend to be able to go through all of this with me. It was obviously extremely complex for him at various points, and you know, it's, as I say, it's an opportunity for me to say to his credit that he saw it through to the bitter end, and I'm extraordinarily indebted to him for that.
So Manuel, how was it from your perspective? Did you say yes immediately? Did you know what you're getting yourself into?
Well, I think for me, I think the timeline was slightly different. I had just come back from Berlin, and Bobby had said to me, I'd love to go to Berlin, and my friends are always going to Berlin and saying what a great city it is, and but I just feel I can't, because of the tragedy that happened to my family there. It would be wrong and disrespectful to go and have a good time in Berlin. And I think Bobby said, but maybe with you I could go. Maybe we should go together, and we should look at my dad's past, and see where he lived, and see where he went to school, and where he prayed. And I said, sure, let's do that. And then, just as a sort of almost a postscript, I said, I have no connection to Berlin personally, except, and I had read an article about him quite recently in the Guardian, in the UK Guardian, about my great uncle Veit. I can't remember why, but anyway, I told Bobby, about this character, and it was then that Bobby said, "Wow, this is fantastic. I think we should. This has the potential for a film. We should go there and we should investigate, both our families' paths in Berlin, and I should film it." And at that point, I mean, it made me uncomfortable to be on film. Why do you have to do these things on film? Why does everything have to be on film? We could just go as friends. But I thought, whatever filming happens, it's going to be, really just for ourselves, to record it. And I thought, fine, I don't mind. It was only after that, really. Pardon?
So you never thought it would actually become a film?
No, because I didn't realize the suitcase only was discovered after this point.
Oh, I see.
And then that became a sort of a huge dramatic moment, a really big sort of, a non-submersible, unit of drama. I thought, okay, well, this could be bigger. This is really something, that the public might be interested in. And then I think Bobby got real funding. And it all became, it became sort of uncomfortable for me, because it's not natural for me to do things on camera. But at the same time, I think it was absolutely right that Bobby wanted to do it that way, because I think a lot of the things that happened to us, for example, even making contact with the journalist at Axel Springer and finding out about this, that took quite a lot of work, quite a lot of more work than appears in the film, of sort of, pursuing this place and waiting around in the lobby of offices and going to the wrong places. And, and I think without the pressure of filmmaking, you don't do those things. You know what I mean? You need that pressure of finding the story, getting the material. If there hadn't been that, we probably wouldn't have made half the discoveries that we did. So, in the end,
I dare say we still wouldn't have even got to Berlin, Manuel. Like so many other trips we've been talking about for years and never got around to doing.
Perhaps. I mean, yes. Making the film, having that rigor, that structure, that we had, that discipline made us discover much more than we would have without it. So, I can see why Bobby wanted to do it that way.
And you also know filmmaking. It's not foreign to you in any way. So you kind of knew what a story is made up of, even if you haven't been.
But there was no story. There was. I didn't. In that sense, I wasn't used to that of going into something with no story and a story developing. And really quite an amazing story. I wasn't prepared for that.
What was the toughest point for you? Because you say it wasn't natural, but not, it was uncomfortable for you, but not just because it was on camera, but because the whole topic is uncomfortable.
I think the toughest point for me was, I think when I felt that Bobby had constructed a narrative for the film that he wanted it to take, that I was guessing at. And I was guessing that he wanted to make a real parallel between his family that he'd lost in Berlin and my great uncle, and that somehow they should be twin stories. One about, you know, discovering a lost, you know, a lost family that Bobby very much loved, and me discovering, you know, this terrible hidden secret in my family. And I couldn't rise to that because I think as Christiana very, you know, I think the interview with her is very, very astute. And the thing that's so difficult is loving somebody who's totally unlovable. That's what's so difficult for so many Germans. That's what's so difficult for Veit's children. But I didn't know him. He died before I was born. Yeah. I had no relationship. I didn't even like him. I didn't love him. I had nothing that I could really emotionally engage with him. And I couldn't, to do so felt phony. But I thought that's what I was being at some points asked to do. You know, that's the scene outside his house, right. Yeah. For example. So I found that difficult. I didn't know what I was supposed to be playing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't want to do something that was phony.
Bobby, do you feel that you were really, because you're a director, you created a narrative and didn't ask the character if it wanted to play that part?
Well, I think, you know, again, in my defense,
no, this is not
making a documentary, and certainly a personal documentary, which is something that I strongly recommend not to be embarked upon. It was uncharted territory for me, and I think, you know, a lot of the time I felt I was shooting in the dark. A lot of the time I felt like I was looking for seeking advice from other people, and perhaps allowing poor advice to influence me. And most of all, I think it was really only when we finally got to the edit that I started to understand what the direction of the film was going to be. I'm not sure if Arik is with us, if he's joined us. Arik Lav-Leibovich, who's the editor of the film, and I was extremely fortunate to work with Arik. For those of you who are not familiar with his name, he's one of Israel's foremost drama and documentary editors. And really that...
One could say that he's written a book about it.
Yeah, he's unquestionably an authority, if not a maestro. And I was extremely fortunate to be able to work with Arik, because otherwise I really don't think that I would have known how to construct this film. As you rightly said, there were several sort of competing revelations and things that were happening on camera, which are every filmmaker's dream. And I didn't know how I was going to piece all of that together and make a coherent film that was going to be 1 hour long, with the dozens and dozens of hours that we'd shot. And, you know, that I think is the greatness of a good editor, is the ability to construct a comprehensive narrative. So, you know, inevitably there is always going to be a degree of manipulation of the footage in order to tell a story that can be told within 1 hour. But the film for me was constantly changing. And as I say, I think it was really only once we finished however many years of filming, I think the filming was over the course of 3.5, 4 years. It was only then when I actually reached the editing suite that I started to understand what the film was going to be. And in the course of editing, it changed as well and metamorphosed.
Sorry, if I can jump in.
Sure.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to imply that you were constructing a false narrative. I think that what I have just described is something that you genuinely, at the time, wanted from me and thought was appropriate for me to feel.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, I mean,
it wasn't something that you wanted something false from me. It was something that you wanted, you thought that I should go through.
I think, if you've mentioned that scene outside Fight's house, which I think is a, for want of a better word, a good example. And it's a scene that has been quite it's a scene that has provoked a range of reactions, I think, more than any other scene in the film. I always find it very interesting to hear feedback from audiences at Q&As. I've been fortunate to travel the world with the film, and every audience in every country responds differently. And that is a particular scene that is always very controversial, because people either think that I am a terrible friend and a bad person, and how could I put my dear friend who's gone to such lengths to accompany me on this voyage, how could I do this to him? And others who have understood where that emotion, that raw emotion, was coming from. And even when we were in the edit, there were people, we had sort of focus groups, and in the course of the various stages of editing, and some of those focus groups, people said to me, you can't put that scene in because you come over really badly. And I felt that very strongly that scene needs to be in there, because I think there's an honesty to my response there, which, as awkward as I feel myself watching it now, and as uncomfortable as I feel about it, yes, I think that genuinely expressed what I was demanding from Manuel, and in a totally, obviously not in a rational way by any means, but I was sort of placing upon him a role which clearly was a role that he'd made it very clear from the beginning he had no interest in playing, as a representative of Fight Harlan, and even worse, as a representative of Nazi Germany. But in the sort of the nature of the developments that happened in the course of that week, that was the role that I was coercing upon him. And yes, I'm not proud of it, but I do think it's an important scene, and I think it says a lot about what I was experiencing. Yeah,
I think that the third part of what you were going through, as well as being a participant and a director, as a participant, you were also going, as our discoveries progressed, you were going through a trauma. And I think part of that trauma expressed itself in a sort of hatred of me.
Well, not of you, but of what I forced upon you to represent. No, I mean, in many respects, I've said this frequently. The film for me was very therapeutic. And trauma is the word. And I think, part of making this film, it helped me to overcome my trauma, both in sort of complexities of my relationship with my father, but obviously even more so with my relationship with Germany, modern Germany. And for me, it was very therapeutic, and unquestionably, Manuel's the role that I imposed upon him was part of that healing for me.
Where are you two, if I may ask, right now with all of this?
We're actually really good. I didn't think I would ever come to a point where I could say that. I really, when I came back from Berlin for the second time, I was in such a rage.
The second time or the first time?
Actually, both times. But
Oh,
the
really?
second time, perhaps even more. Yeah.
Mm.
I didn't think our friendship could survive it. I was really sad. And we had some bitter conversations. I mean, really, yeah. I remember a few sort of outside my house of just, I said terrible things to Bobby. But, you know, he took it, you know, and he
I think I deserved it.
He was, you know, very, very patient. And he also listened. And he was, in the end, you know, very respectful of my problems and issues. Yeah, finally, I think we've come out of it stronger, even.
No, I always said from the word go, I said, I'm, you know, as important as the film is to me, I'm not going to sacrifice the friendship, and I'm not going to sacrifice my friend. I think I came very, very, very close to doing that, but thankfully we have come out the other side. And I think, you know, a sort of a really significant event for both of us was when the film was at the UK Jewish Film Festival last, when was it? September, October, November, the winter of 2022. And I think Manuel initially was unsure whether he'd want to be present. I certainly deliberated about whether I wanted to come to the UK festival, because I realized that it was going to be on Manuel's home turf, and that was going to be problematic for him. And I deliberated about that, and eventually I felt, well, you know, England is obviously, in many respects, it's my home as well, and I feel like I do want it to be there. And thankfully Manuel came, and then I said to him just before the festival, I said to him, you know, bear in mind there's going to be a Q&A there, and people are going to see you in the audience. They might want to address you with questions. And to my great joy, Manuel said, so I'll come up on stage with you and do the Q&A. And I think that was a real turning point for both of us. I think if I'm allowed to say so in Manuel's name, I think it was the first time where he actually was able to experience the audience's response to him, which even in a, you know, in the context of a Jewish film festival, I think he, for the first time, witnessed just to what extent people regarded him as the hero of the film, and certainly not the anti-hero that I think he feared he was going to be perceived as. And I think that was the point really at which we were both able to sort of lay it to rest. And we went out to eat in a restaurant a couple of evenings after the Q&A, and Manuel said to me, I think very significantly, I think, you know, this is the point at which we actually can move on now. We can put this behind us, which I'm extremely grateful for, both to him and also to, as I say, to the fact that I was able to make this film, which was of such significance to me, and not to have sacrificed a friendship which is of enormous importance to me as well.
Well, the questions from the audience are flowing in, and before we move on to that, I just want to say it's really, and before we listen to Alec, he's actually on here, and I'd love to ask him a question too. I just have to say that it's in an era that we're living in where it seems like all societies are polarized. It's so heartwarming to see two people being able to talk about things, and knowing that talking about it just, you know, opens it, airs it, and you can continue your lives, your friendship. I mean, to me, that's the strongest message that can come off of a film that deals with the Holocaust in some way.
That's good.
Alec, so what was the hardest thing in editing this very emotional, multi-layered, multi-protagonist film?
I think I think that the difficult part was to find the place of the Holocaust, of the past, in the friendship story. I think that was the difficult part. How much Holocaust will be in the friendship of Bobby and Manuel, with all the of course, with all the delicate issues that we have to take in consider in order to keep the movie comfortable with everyone. I think that was the difficult part for me, because you have to actually it's not like a film that you have your own perspective about the issue, and then you roll it and you put it, and this is my truth, and this is what I want to tell. It's very delicate, because there are two characters here that have to be not equal, but have to be happy with what you try to tell, and of course it's a question of perspective, and I think that was the difficult part for me.
I think it's interesting actually what Arik has said, because this is something that I think it's clear in the film, but in our relationship, Manuel and myself, prior to making this film, the Holocaust never really arose. We never sort of, I certainly didn't regard him as German. I don't think we ever really discussed the Holocaust, even though, you know, I knew that his family were from Germany and that he was born in Germany. I think, you know, we were sort of busy being British school kids, and the whole sort of Jewish German thing never really entered our conversation or our experience. And I think, you know, that also for me was a sort of a turning point in the film. Was, you know, it's strange. There's a line in the film which always gets the biggest laugh, and I'm always surprised by it. When I say to Manuel, when you came into the apartment and you put your German passport down on the dresser, and I didn't realize you were as German as that. And that always gets a guffaw in the audience. And I'd never really understood what's so funny about that, because that for me was a really significant moment when I saw that he had a German passport. And I just couldn't believe it, because it was sort of contrary to the persona of Manuel in my life. I'd never regarded him as being German. And all of a sudden, it was sort of in my face with this, seeing this German passport. You know, as superficial as that is, as trite as it sounds, to me it assumed enormous significance, because all of a sudden it turned upside down my sort of perception of him, and particularly in the context in which that happened.
Because all of a sudden, German is not like a title. It's an actual person that you love, that you've known your whole life right in front of you.
And I think, you know, this also was, for me, was something that was very important to me to incorporate in the film, was that and I think like many other, certainly Israelis and probably Jews, never really stopped to think about what the Germans went through after the war. And, you know, whilst clearly the tragedy that the Jews experienced is it's not comparable in any way, and I'm not for a moment suggesting that it is, clearly the German people experienced a tragedy as well, and a trauma, which I think it's just remarkable that modern Germany managed, like a phoenix from the ashes, to reinvent itself and become the remarkable country that it is today. And, you know, when we were speaking to Christiana Kubrick, obviously some of the things that she was saying there were just real eye-openers to me, to hear a German-born and bred woman talking about how she wanted to just completely disconnect from her German identity.
The name, everything.
Yeah. And I'd never stopped to think about that. So if the film has caused people to think about that, then I think that in itself is of significance.
Okay, I want to move on to the questions because there are many of them. So first of all, if you want to contribute, then there's a link right here in the chat. First question from Tommy, question to Manuel. How do you feel about Israeli or Jewish difficulty how do you feel about the Israeli-Jewish difficulty until today with Germans and Germany? I don't know that there is difficulty, but okay. And even the German language. Oh, the difficulty that Israelis and Jews might have with Germans in Germany and the German language. I'm sorry, do you resent the tendency to see you as a German, although you define yourself as British?
I don't resent it. It's something, I'm sort of in a position where it's something I can choose to reveal or not. Mm-hmm. No one would think it unless I told them. And I have to say, I think I've sort of answered the question in the film in a way. I think it was something. It was quite a strong presence in the 1970s and 80s. It brought about quite a strong reaction. It doesn't do that anymore. It doesn't have the same heft, and it's not freighted with the same.
Right.
But nevertheless, it's not something that I'm pleased to say about myself. It's something that I wouldn't naturally say about myself. I'd rather not
say that you're German.
Yeah.
No, I mean, obviously, but I mean, there were anecdotes that Manuel told me, some of which are in the film and some of which aren't, which I find quite shocking, about how sort of people have like sort of publicly outed him as a German, as if it's, like a sort of a personal failing, or the difficulties, Manuel, that you told us about with when you were auditioning and you were always being cast as the German. It's it's kind of difficult to shake it off. So I think, it's interesting what you say, that it's not like you sort of actively hide it, but it's not something that you seek to publicize. And maybe that was part of your difficulty actually with the film, was that it was sort of outing you.
No, I don't think it wasn't being German that I had difficulties with the film. I think at certain points in previous edits, I had difficulties with the idea that I was uncomfortable confronting the skeletons in my family cupboard. I didn't want to come across like that because I didn't feel it was accurate. I certainly didn't want, my children to think that.
Okay, well, there are some questions here that have already been answered, so I'm moving to ones that were not. Fade Harlan was a filmmaker. You are a filmmaker. How do you think a filmmaker can turn into doing such a horrible creation like that film that he made? Can it happen to everyone, or was there something bad inherent in him? Well, that's a huge question.
Right. I think it's
a huge question.
Go ahead.
I think if we say that it was something inherently bad in him, then we are being a bit lazy and we are letting ourselves off the hook and failing to guard against the danger. of falling into similar traps. I don't know exactly, what made him do that. And he never, I've read his autobiography and I've talked to his kids, and he was too cowardly really to ask those questions honestly of himself during his lifetime. So he made excuses until he died, which I found almost just as unforgivable as what he did.
That he didn't take responsibility for.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Because I think what he did is human and it's forgivable. I think he was cowardly, he was ambitious, he was frightened. I think that he lived in, and it's very, very difficult to imagine the context of that time. It was incredibly macho. Men were geared to being tough and hard and not flinching in the face of, ugly things. And, that was the society that was around him. And he didn't want, probably, he was afraid to look like a loser in front of these powerful people, and who had invested lots of money in him. And that, coupled with a sort of a vanity and an ambition and a sense that he's the big shot, and also not forgetting that anti-Semitism was totally normal in his milieu. There was nothing special or unusual or original in what he was doing in his film. That was what everyone around him thought. So to think that the
mere fact, just to compound that, the mere fact that the film was such a success at the Venice Film Festival,
Yeah, exactly.
that in itself says just how sort of acceptable that anti-Semitism was in those times, not just in Germany, in all of Europe.
Bobby, you're also a filmmaker. Do you agree with Manuel that it's not inherent in the specific person, but maybe all of us have that in us?
I asked myself in the course of making the film on many occasions, as a filmmaker who is keen to get a budget to make the film that he wants to make, who is keen to establish a reputation and is always thinking what the next film will be. I think I can understand that, Manuel says it's ambition. I think it's probably even more than that. It's a sort of a self-interest that, you can find yourself possibly compromising on your principles because you want to get the work. You want to be, in this case, it was the biggest budget film that was made by the Nazis. The Nazis were prolific filmmakers, and this was a major project. And yes, it's something that I've asked myself, if I were in those times, how would I have dealt with it? And in these times, where do I draw the line about things that I do, about funding that I accept? And I think it's a very, very important lesson for me to have tried to get my head around Fight Harlan, whether there was a degree of personal, I don't know about anti-Semitism, but whether there was his own personal story, whether there was a degree of that being a part of his motivation. His first wife was Jewish. I know this is a bone of contention between Manuel and myself, but and perhaps he can obviously respond to this how he'd like, but his first wife was a Jewish lady called Dora Gerson. She left him. He apparently was devastated that she'd left him. She subsequently was captured along with her second husband and children, attempting to flee to Switzerland, and she turned to Fight Harlan to save her, thinking that with his connections he might be in a position to assist. That letter was unanswered, and she and her husband and kids died in Auschwitz. So whether there was a degree of a sort of a personal vendetta, or whether there was some anti-Semitism, or whether he was just affected by the times in which he lived and what was considered the sort of norms of those times, it's speculation. The bottom line is, as Manuel said, he never took responsibility for what he did. He never expressed any remorse. He was put on trial twice for crimes against humanity, and acquitted. And I think probably what I found most appalling about that acquittal, because, you know, obviously it's a major philosophical question. Can you actually, can a piece of art be a war crime? What I think I found most disturbing about that was when he came out of the court and he was raised up in the air by his supporters, he utilized that opportunity to plug his new film. And I think that probably says more about him than anything else.
Well, but isn't that consistent with what Manuel just described about him?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
As a researcher. It's
He's a
just
narcissist.
consistent with the character.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I think ultimately, yes, that is, you know, everything else is speculation. I think the one thing
Yeah.
that we can be certain of was that he was very, very ambitious and very vain, and was prepared to do pretty much anything to further his own career.
Well, I'm changing direction a little bit. There is a question here from Dvora. Bobby, how can you explain the fact that your father did not share his past with your mother?
Well, I don't think I need to explain it. I think my mum actually explains it very well in the film, you know, where she says he only wanted to look to the future, to the present and the future. He didn't want to dwell on the past. You know, obviously, the way in which he dealt with the diabolical trauma that he experienced as a child growing up in Nazi Germany, and as a teenager being plucked out of his familiar surroundings and away from his family, and then as a young adult having to make a life for himself with nothing to sort of to go on, just to completely start afresh in a new country with a new language and with no family or friends. And he was dedicated to that, to creating a life for himself. And I think if he had stopped to look backwards rather than forwards, he might not have succeeded in the way that he did. And for him, the most important thing was forming his own family. You know, what I understood through the film, I think to a great extent, was a lot of the conflict that I experienced with him stemmed from that. He wanted me to have the education that he was denied. He wanted me to have opportunities that he never had. And when he saw that I wasn't taking either the education or the opportunities too seriously, I think he found that not just offensive, but very of enormous concern. I think, you know, just in the same way that he kept that suitcase for all those years but never opened it, I think similarly he, you know, I often felt that he'd thrown pebbles for me to find, to, you know, none of this was thrown away. The suitcase, not only was it photo albums, it was school reports and letters between him and his parents, and his own personal diaries, which are very intimate and very revealing. And I figure, you know, well, he kept it for all those years. Clearly, he wanted to tell the story. And ultimately, these recordings of the Imperial War Museum, which was the most incredible discovery, you know, that also is a testament to the fact that he wanted to tell his story. And I hope that by making the film, I have sort of served that desire of his posthumously, that I've been able to tell his story. But I think it's totally understandable that he could only move forward by not reflecting on the past.
There's another question here. Are you targeting, who are you targeting the film for? What reactions did you get from young audiences, if you had a chance to screen it to younger audiences.
I never thought about who I was targeting the film for. I think I was targeting it primarily for myself. As I say, for me, it was a very cathartic, very therapeutic experience. And if people have benefited from it, or learned from it, or it's just got them thinking about things, then, you know, I feel like I have accomplished something of significance. As I say, reactions are, it's very interesting because you know, I've screened it in Israel, I've screened it in England, I've screened it in Germany and Holland, we've even screened it in Bangladesh.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's really traveled the world. Different audiences respond in different ways. I think probably we had obviously Holocaust Day here a couple of weeks ago. I had an amazing screening with a group from the Scouts movement. They had like a group of young leaders from all over the world, and there was a very significant number of young Germans there who found it very, very emotional. And I think for them also, it served in a very therapeutic way, because they started talking about their family members and how they don't normally talk about them. And it sort of created an opportunity for them to share their family traumas. So like I say, it's always very interesting. Different audiences respond in different ways. On the whole, it's been very well received wherever it's been shown. And many sort of similar questions or concerns have arisen, irrespective of whether it's a young audience, an older audience, a local audience, a foreign audience. Yeah.
Well, I have to say that I'm really, really happy to hear and see that the two of you are back to being good friends. I think really that's the most important message, is that your past, I mean, it's not even your past, it's your family's past, doesn't need to get in between friendships, because that's really the most important thing. I want to thank you so much for this really very candid and open conversation. And I want to invite whoever's here to next week. We have a film called Tehran Children. I'm sorry. It's not Tehran Children. Can you help me out here, Rami?
Twice Orphaned.
Oh, Orphans. Okay. So it's a story of Abraham, Ziggy, Schreiber, and Robinson that form an uncrowned governing council of the Tehran Children. The four of them represent 217 Holocaust orphans who are now bringing legal action against the state of Israel for funds received from Germany for their rehabilitation. In their old age, they have set out to battle the state of Israel to get the money that they deserve. It's an incredible film, and the filmmaker Talia Frank is going to be with us for Q&A. So please join us next week. Thank you, Bobby. Thank you, Manuel. Thank you, David and Alec, for a beautiful, beautiful film and a lovely conversation. Thanks, everyone.
And if I may say thank you to you, Jasmine.
Sure.
Once again, it's a pleasure to answer your questions and to think about the significance of the questions and how to answer them significantly, and to Rami as well for this amazing platform, which once again, it's been an honor to be here, and thank you for enabling it.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. It was really interesting.
Thank you. Good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.